Hey guys, here's a nice little game where I thought I played really well until I fell for one of the classic blunders. Let me take you through the game. There's a really important lesson in it, quite a painful lesson. So I'm playing somebody else. He's rated high 1300s and he starts with e4. I play e6. The French knight comes out. I play d5 and we go into the exchange variation, typically known as boring. d4 is played. I bring my bishop out to pin the knight, and he plays c4, attacking my central pawn, which I then defend with my knight. He pushes c5, I bring out my other knight, and he breaks the pin on the knight with his light square bishop. So far so good. I then decide to be a little bit aggressive and move a second piece into my opponent's territory with knight to e4. So just wanting to increase the pressure. I'm feeling that way inclined. He castles, and I figure that there's not much future for my dark squared bishop with this advanced pawn on c5, so I decide to push g6 so I can fianchetto my bishop there to g7, and then have ideas about targeting this weaker pawn, which is like a backwards pawn, at the back of this little pawn structure. So the rook comes out to e1, I fianchetto my bishop, knight moves away, and now it's slightly complex kind of tension here. So obviously the two bishops are looking at each other, the two knights are looking at each other, and there's potential x-ray of the rook that's still looking down at my king. This bishop is undefended, so I do need to do something about it. So first thing I do is exchange the bishops off, and then I grab this pawn thinking I'm now up a pawn, okay? But in actual fact there are two attackers now against this knight. So he can capture, pawn recaptures, rook recaptures with check, and so that I can retain castling rights, I withdraw my knight here to e6, which does open up lines for the queen, but that's defended by the a rook anyway. Queen comes out to a4 with check, but I just push c6 and get out of that. And now knight comes out. And I do notice here that I have a lovely fork, however, I can't move that knight because it's currently pinned to my king. So castle the king to get out of that. And bishop comes out defending the pawn. I centralise my rook. White moves his rook across to attack my queen, and I simply move it to c7 out of the way. So remember, I've still got a dark squared bishop, so I've always got ideas of manoeuvring my dark squared bishop onto this diagonal, and together with my queen, and maybe launching a surprise attack against h2. Queen moves across to b4, not achieving an awful lot. I kick the queen with my a pawn, queen moves back, and I get my bishop onto that diagonal. So there may be some manoeuvring to go on here, like queen across, bishop back to b8, queen back, that kind of thing. White moves his rook to e1, doubling up his rooks, and because I've now got two pieces on this diagonal, then I am able to go in with check. And this is important because in some cases it can be tempting to dive in and grab one of these edge pawns with the bishop. If it comes with check, that's fine because the king has to move, right? If it does not come with check, then there is a danger of the adjacent pawn being pushed and trapping the bishop in the corner. So you always have to be careful about that one. So I bring my bishop back to where it was. It's now looking at the knight, and white brings his bishop to h6. So there's a clear threat. If this queen can ever get into that square, then there's a checkmating threat there. So I now grab this pawn because the bishop was defending the pawn. Okay, now here's where things get really interesting. So I'm starting to think I've got a great fork here. I'm looking at the rook, I'm looking at the queen, okay, and my opponent now thinks for just 20 seconds In fact, he barely thinks at all, actually. 5 seconds on his next move. So, and he captures my bishop on e5. Okay. Now, whenever material is offered or may have been offered, okay, that should wave a red flag, and you should think, okay, what's going on here? Now, I've got lots of options here. The obvious one was to capture the queen. Okay, it's a free queen. Okay, I could also have taken that rook. So capture the rook. If rook recaptures, queen takes rook. Happy days. I'm a rook up, right? But what and I've got 24 minutes left on my clock. 24 minutes I had to think about this. The game was basically won if I was careful and if I took my time. Okay, so any time that the apple is dangled before you in chess should wave a red flag, should make you stop, slow down, consider, think. All right. I did not think. I spent 4 seconds. I took the queen, and can you see the deadly continuation here? Basically, this bishop has taken away my king's escape square of g7. Okay, it's forced mate in 2. Rook takes rook. There's only one legal move. Rook takes rook, checkmate. There you go. So the lesson in this is, for me, that I need to tune in my spider senses. That my opponent had played a solid game up to that point. Why would he suddenly allow me just to take his queen? I got overexcited. I lost my cool, and I should have taken my time and figured out what my opponent's plan was. There's no excuse for failing to ask yourself that question on every move. Why did my opponent capture my bishop when his queen was hanging? Because he saw something that not that I couldn't see, I just didn't bother to take the time. And it cost me. So, useful lesson there, good lesson for me. I hope it's been useful for you. See you next time.